I'm Chloe, 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I sat in a mahogany paneled law office listening to my father's attorney read his will. My two brothers split $45 million between them, while I sat there hearing the lawyer read that I was, quote, worthless to the family empire. But yesterday, while cleaning out mom's old jewelry box that dad left me as an insult, I found a letter she'd written 19 years ago that changed everything. Before I share what turned my entire world upside down, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how one hidden letter exposed the truth about my family's fortune and why my mother chose me, the worthless daughter, to carry on her real legacy. The September afternoon was unseasonably warm when I walked into the law offices of Brennan Walsh and Associates on the 52nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise. The conference room smelled like leather and old money, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. My brothers were already there, of course. Marcus 41 sat at the head of the table like he owned the place, his Armani suit perfectly pressed, checking his phone with that perpetual look of importance he'd perfected since becoming CFO of Dad's companies. Jonathan, 38, lounged in his chair, with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world, his Rolex catching the afternoon light every time he moved his hand. Me. I'd taken the subway from Brooklyn in my best department store blazer, the one I wore to donor meetings at the homeless shelter where I worked. The same blazer I'd worn to every family function for the past 3 years, not that anyone ever noticed. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat and began reading. The estate of Richard Sterling valued at $45 million after taxes and debts. Marcus would receive $23 million plus controlling interest in Sterling Manufacturing International. His face remained stoic, but I saw the slight upturn of his mouth, the satisfaction he couldn't quite hide. Jonathan would receive $22 million plus the entire real estate portfolio, including the Hampton estate and the Miami properties. He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable shifting in his seat and avoiding my eyes. Then Mr. Brennan got to me. To Chloe Marie Sterling, I leave nothing of monetary value, as she has proven herself worthless to the Sterling legacy by choosing sentiment over success. However, she may have her mother's old jewelry box, since she always preferred her mother's sentimental nonsense to real achievement. The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus actually chuckled, a soft sound that cut deeper than any shout could have. Jonathan mumbled something about Dad being harsh, but he didn't look at me, didn't defend me. Never had, never would. As Mr. Brennan droned on about tax implications and transfer documents, my mind drifted back to all the times I tried to prove myself worthy in my father's eyes. The science fair when I was 14, where I'd won first place in the entire state with my environmental water filtration project. Dad didn't come. He was closing some deal in Chicago, but he flew back the same night to watch Marcus's mediocre lacrosse game. I remembered graduating summa cum laude from Columbia, with a double major in social work and business administration. I thought maybe, just maybe, the business degree would mean something to him. Instead, he'd stood at my graduation dinner and toasted Marcus's promotion to vice president, a position he'd been handed at 25 with his fresh Harvard MBA that Dad paid for in full. When someone mentioned my academic achievements, Dad had waved his hand dismissively and said I was wasting my potential on bleeding heart nonsense. The meeting continued for another hour. Marcus discussed yacht purchases with Jonathan, comparing models and debating between Mediterranean or Caribbean moorings for the summer. They talked about their wives' reactions to the windfall, about private schools for their children, about investment strategies. All while I sat there, invisible, holding a wooden box that probably cost less than the lunch Marcus had eaten that day. Mr. Brennan finally asked if I wanted to contest the will. The question seemed perfunctory, almost amused. What grounds would I have? Dad was of sound mind. He had the right to distribute his assets however he wanted. Being a terrible father wasn't illegal. I stood up quietly, tucking the jewelry box under my arm. Marcus finally looked at me, then his eyes scanning my simple blazer, my sensible flats, my drugstore makeup. Everything about me screamed failure in his world. "You know, Chloe," he said with false sympathy, "if you need money, I could maybe find you an entry-level position at one of the companies. Something in filing, perhaps." I didn't trust myself to speak. I just walked out my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. while behind me, my brothers returned to discussing their newfound millions. The elevator ride down felt endless. 52 floors of descent, while my mind processed what had just happened. Not that it surprised me. Dad had been telling me I was worthless since Mom died. This was just his final statement on the matter. My mother Elizabeth had been brilliant in ways my father never acknowledged. She'd graduated MIT at 20 with a degree in chemical engineering, something almost unheard of for a woman in her time. I'd found her old yearbooks once hidden in the attic, and seen the notes from classmates calling her the genius of their generation. But by the time I was born, she was just Mrs. Richard Sterling, wife of the ambitious businessman, mother to his 3 children, host of his dinner parties. She died when I was 15, cancer taking her slowly over 18 months. Those last months were when she and I became closest. While Dad threw himself even deeper into work and my brothers avoided the reality of her decline, I spent every afternoon after school in her room. We'd talk about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about her dreams before marriage, about the research she'd wanted to pursue, about the patents she'd nearly filed. Her last words to me whispered while Dad was on a conference call in the hallway, and my brothers were at their respective sports practices were simple. "You have my strength, sweetheart. Never forget that. You have something they'll never understand." I thought she meant emotional strength, the ability to care, to empathize, to see beyond profit margins and stock portfolios. I never imagined she meant something more literal. Dad's empire had started with a single manufacturing plant in New Jersey, making industrial cleaning supplies. By the time I was 10, he owned 12 companies across 3 states. He was ruthless in business, famous for hostile takeovers and aggressive expansion. Competitors feared him. Employees respected him. His family. We were props in his success story, and some props were more valuable than others. After Mom died, the divide became a chasm. Marcus was 22, fresh from undergraduate at Princeton, being groomed for Harvard Business School. Dad spent weekends teaching him about leveraged buyouts and profit maximization. Jonathan was 18, headed to Wharton with a guaranteed executive position waiting. They became the sons of Richard Sterling, future titans of industry. And me, I was the 15-year-old girl who looked too much like her dead mother. Dad couldn't stand to look at me some days. Other days, he'd look right through me like I didn't exist. When I showed interest in the business at 16, sitting in his study one evening with a proposal I'd worked on for weeks about expanding into sustainable products, he actually laughed. "Sweetie," he said, "the condescension dripping from the endearment business isn't for everyone. Maybe you should focus on finding a nice husband who can take care of you." So I stopped trying to enter his world and built my own. I chose Columbia for college, close enough to home, but far enough to breathe. When I declared my major in social work, Dad gave me an ultimatum over dinner at the Yale Club. Change your major to something respectable or pay your own way. I chose the latter. 3 jobs. That's what it took to get through Columbia. Tutoring spoiled Upper East Side kids in the evenings, working at a coffee shop on weekends, and doing data entry at night. My roommates thought I was crazy. They didn't understand why Richard Sterling's daughter was serving lattes at 5 in the morning. I never told them about the ultimatum. Pride, maybe. Or just exhaustion at explaining my family dynamics. Meanwhile, Marcus sailed through Harvard Business School, his tuition paid in full, his apartment in Cambridge overlooking the Charles River, his monthly allowance more than I made in a semester. He graduated and walked straight into a VP position at Sterling Manufacturing with a 7-figure signing bonus and a company car that cost more than most people's houses. Jonathan's path was similar, but flashier. Wharton undergraduate, then straight into the family business as director of operations. His bonus that first year was $2 million. He bought a penthouse in Tribeca and proposed to his college girlfriend with a ring that made the society pages. I graduated with honors and started working at a homeless shelter in Brooklyn for $30,000 a year. The first time I helped a family find permanent housing after months on the streets, I felt something my brothers would never understand: purpose beyond profit. Within 5 years, I developed an innovative transitional housing program that got national recognition. The Department of Housing and Urban Development gave me an award. My picture was in the New York Times. Dad never mentioned it, never acknowledged it. At family dinners, which became increasingly rare, he'd toast Marcus's latest acquisition or Jonathan's quarterly profits while I sat there with my water glass unwanted at my own father's table. The last time I saw him alive was 2 years ago at what we generously called a family dinner, but was really a business celebration. Marcus had just closed a deal that netted the company $50 million in projected revenue. Dad raised his glass of 30-year-old scotch and spoke about legacy, about building something that matters, about his sons carrying forward the Sterling name with honor. I left before dessert, walked out into the November cold without my coat rather than spend another minute being erased in real time. Dad died 8 months later. Heart attack at his desk, which somehow seemed fitting. He died as he lived working on another deal, another acquisition, another million to add to the pile. The jewelry box sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks. Every morning I'd make coffee in my tiny Brooklyn apartment and stare at it, this simple wooden thing that represented my entire inheritance. Some days I wanted to throw it away to reject even this insulting crumb from my father's table. Other days I'd run my fingers over the smooth surface and remember my mother's hands doing the same. Finally, on a rainy Saturday when I had no shifts at the shelter and the silence in my apartment felt too heavy, I opened it. The hinges creaked softly, releasing a faint scent that immediately transported me back 19 years. Mom's perfume, lavender and vanilla, somehow still clinging to the velvet lining after all this time. Inside was exactly what I'd expected at first glance. Her wedding ring, a modest gold band with a small diamond, nothing like the massive rocks my brother's wives wore. The bracelet I'd made her when I was 7, beads spelling out "Best Mom" in crooked letters that she'd worn to every school event until she got too sick. Pressed flowers from our garden roses, and baby's breath that we'd grown together the spring before her diagnosis. I lifted each item carefully, memories flooding back with every touch. The wedding ring she'd twisted when nervous during Dad's business dinners. The bracelet she'd touched for luck before my school presentations. The flowers we'd picked on what turned out to be our last good day together, when she could still walk in the garden without help. At the bottom was a photo I'd never seen before. Mom and Dad on their wedding day, both so young before life and ambition had changed everything. She looked radiant, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow of knowledge, maybe like she could see what was coming. I was putting everything back when my finger caught on something unusual. The bottom of the box felt slightly raised on one side. I pressed down and heard a soft click. The entire bottom panel shifted, revealing a hidden compartment I never knew existed. My heart started racing as I lifted the false bottom completely. Underneath were 3 items that made no sense at first. A brass key with the number 447 engraved on it, the Chase Manhattan Bank logo visible despite the tarnish. A photograph I definitely had never seen. And an envelope with my name written in Mom's distinctive handwriting. The photograph struck me first. It was Mom, but not the Mom I knew. This was Elizabeth before she became Mrs. Sterling. She stood in what looked like a laboratory wearing a white coat, her smile bright and confident. Behind her on the wall were framed patents, at least a dozen of them, her name visible on each one. There were awards on the shelves, trophies and certificates. She looked like someone who was going to change the world. The envelope was sealed with wax, old-fashioned and formal. My name was written across the front with a date 19 years ago, just 2 months before she died. Underneath my name she'd written, "When the time is right, you'll know." My hands shook as I broke the seal. The letter inside was 4 pages of her careful handwriting, slightly shakier than normal, probably from the medication she was on by then. But every word was clear, every sentence deliberate. The first line stopped my breath. "My dearest Chloe, if you're reading this, you've discovered what your father never knew existed. And it's time you learned the truth about who you really are and what you've actually inherited." I sat down hard on my kitchen stool, the letter trembling in my hands. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against my windows like it was trying to get my attention. I took a deep breath and kept reading. "Your father will probably leave you nothing. He's told me as much in his crueler moments, saying you remind him too much of my weakness. But what he never knew, what I've kept hidden for 30 years, is that I was never weak, and neither are you." The pages that followed changed everything. I thought I knew about my family, my parents, and myself. My mother's letter was a revelation wrapped in a confession, each paragraph peeling back layers of deception I never knew existed. She began with her life before my father, the life she'd never spoken about, the brilliant scientist who'd been courted by every major chemical company in the country. Before I met your father, I held 12 patents for revolutionary chemical processes. My professor at MIT called me the most promising mind of my generation. DuPont offered me $10 million for just one of my innovations, a cleaning compound that was both more effective and completely biodegradable. I turned them down because I wanted to develop it myself to build something that was mine. Then I met Richard Sterling at a conference in Boston. He was handsome, charming, and ambitious. He had one failing factory and dreams bigger than his bank account. I fell in love with his vision, his drive, his certainty that he could build an empire. What I didn't realize was that he fell in love with what I could do for him. The next section made my stomach turn. She described how 6 months after their wedding, Dad's factory was weeks from bankruptcy. He'd hidden it from her until the very last moment, then broke down one night confessing everything. He was going to lose it all, his pride, his future, his identity. I saved him, Chloe. I took my biodegradable cleaning compound formula, the one worth millions, and gave it to him. We modified it slightly, filed the patent under the company name with him as the primary inventor. That single product launched Sterling Manufacturing. Every success that followed was built on that foundation, my innovation that I let him claim. He never knew the truth. I told him I'd helped refine his formula, nothing more. His ego needed to believe he'd saved himself. And I loved him enough then to let him believe it. But I wasn't foolish. I kept copies of my original work proof of what really happened locked away in a safety deposit box that matches that key you're holding. The letter went on to detail another secret one that took my breath away. When Mom was 25 before she met Dad, her grandmother had died and left her $5 million. It was a fortune at the time, old railroad money that had been carefully invested. Mom never told Dad about it. I knew the kind of man your father was becoming. I loved him, but I wasn't blind. So I kept my inheritance separate, hidden in accounts he never knew existed. I invested it carefully over the years, watching it grow, while playing the role of the dependent wife. That money, Chloe, has been waiting for you. She went on to explain why she'd chosen me over my brothers. Her words were painful to read, but rang with truth. Marcus showed his character early. At 16, I caught him stealing money from the household account and blaming the housekeeper. Your father fired her without question. Marcus never confessed, even when I confronted him privately. Jonathan was different, but no better. He learned to manipulate through charm, to take credit for others' work with a smile. I watched him destroy a classmate's science project to ensure his own would win. These are your father's sons in every way that matters. But you, my darling girl, you got my heart and my mind. When you were 12, you gave your birthday money to that family at your school who lost their home in a fire. You tutored kids for free when you could have charged what your brothers did. You chose helping people over profit margins, compassion over competition. Your father saw weakness. I saw strength he could never understand. The next section revealed the depth of her planning. She'd met with an attorney not Dad's, but her own, someone named Mr. Peterson at Chase Manhattan Bank. Everything was structured before her marriage, protected by ironclad trusts that predated any marital claims. The accounts had been growing for over 40 years now. She estimated they were worth at least $40 million, possibly more. But then came the hardest part to read. Mom knew about Dad's affairs. 3 of them over the years, including one with Marcus's first-grade teacher. She knew about the money he'd skimmed from his own company's pension fund, technically legal but ethically bankrupt. She knew he'd destroyed competitors using information gained through corporate espionage. She had proof of all of it, carefully documented and stored. I stayed silent to protect you children from scandal. But I protected my assets to protect you specifically. The boys will get their father's money built on lies and cruelty. You'll get mine earned through brilliance and preserved through careful planning. Use it to continue the work I see you've already started. Use it to actually change the world, not just profit from it. The instructions were specific. Take the key to the Chase Manhattan Bank on Fifth Avenue. Ask for Mr. Peterson in private wealth management. He'd been waiting 19 years for me to appear. Everything was in a trust that would transfer to me immediately upon proof of identity. The safety deposit box contained not just her original patents, but documentation of everything, a complete record of the Sterling Empire's true foundation. The final page of the letter was different, more emotional written, like she knew she was running out of time. I'm writing this from my bed, Chloe. The pain medication makes it hard to focus, but I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand that when your father calls you worthless, he's speaking from ignorance. You are worth more than he could ever calculate, because you measure value in the lives you touch, not the dollars you accumulate. I watched you become the person I wished I could have been, brave enough to stand up to him, strong enough to forge your own path, compassionate enough to see that success without service is just greed with better PR. The money I'm leaving you isn't just an inheritance, it's freedom. Freedom to continue your work without worry, to expand your programs to help more people. Don't let your brothers make you feel guilty when they learn about this. They got exactly what they valued most: money earned through traditional Sterling methods. You're getting what you value most, the ability to make a real difference, funded by a woman who understood that difference. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond death itself. Every time you help someone, every time you choose kindness over profit, every time you prove that empathy is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all, remember that you are your mother's daughter. And I couldn't be prouder. All my love, Mom. P.S. Check the Vermont property records for a house in Stowe under Elizabeth Marie Watson, my maiden name. I bought it when you were 5. It's yours too. Your brothers don't know it exists. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face by the end. Everything made sense now. The way Mom would sometimes look at Dad with an expression I couldn't read. The separate bedroom she'd moved to years before her diagnosis, claiming insomnia, but really establishing independence. The way she'd insisted I apply to Columbia, even though Dad wanted me at a smaller, less prestigious school. She'd been planning this my whole life, setting me up to be free. The next morning, I stood outside Chase Manhattan Bank at 9 o'clock sharp, the key clutched in my hand so tightly it left marks on my palm. The building was all glass and marble, the kind of place where my father conducted business, but where I'd never belonged. Until now. Mr. Peterson was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of another stern suit, he was a gentleman in his 70s with kind eyes and a warm smile. He stood up when I entered his office, came around his desk, and took both my hands in his. I've been waiting 19 years to meet you, Chloe, he said. Your mother spoke of you constantly. She'd be so proud of who you've become. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of documents, signatures, and revelations. The trust was worth $42 million. Mom had invested brilliantly, choosing tech stocks before the boom getting out, before the bust diversifying into international markets, with an intuition that would have made Warren Buffett jealous. Mr. Peterson had managed it according to her detailed instructions, growing it carefully, waiting for me. The safety deposit box was a treasure trove of truth. Her original patents, all 12 of them, each one revolutionary in its field. Photos of her receiving awards, newspaper clippings, calling her the future of chemical engineering. And then the documents about Dad, his debts before their marriage, the loan she'd secretly paid off, the formula that built his empire with her signature, clearly dated months before his. There was also a journal, leather-bound and thick with entries. Mom had documented everything. Every idea she gave him that he claimed as his own. Every connection she made that he took credit for. Every innovation that originated in her brilliant mind, but bore his name on the patent. She wasn't bitter in her writing, just methodical like a scientist recording data. Mr. Peterson had barely finished explaining the transfer process when his assistant knocked urgently. There's been a development, she said. The Sterling estate lawyers are here. They're demanding to see any documentation related to their client. My brothers had found out. Somehow the filing of transfer papers had triggered an alert in the estate's accounting. Within minutes, Marcus and Jonathan burst into the office with their lawyer, a sharp-suited shark named David Brennan Jr., son of the executor who'd read the will. This is fraud. Marcus shouted, his face red with rage. She manipulated our mother when she was dying. This money belongs to the estate. Jonathan was quieter, but no less venomous. Dad always said you were calculating under all that bleeding heart nonsense. Guess he was right. Mr. Peterson stood calmly pulling out a file that was inches thick. Gentlemen, everything here predates not only Mrs. Sterling's illness, but her marriage itself. Your mother was quite wealthy before she met your father. This was always separate property maintained as such for 44 years. The lawyer grabbed the documents, scanning them frantically. His face grew paler with each page. The trusts were perfect, the documentation complete. There was no legal avenue to challenge it. But Marcus wasn't done. He pulled out his phone, started recording. You want to play Dirty Chloe? Let's see how your precious non-profit donors feel when they find out you've been hiding millions while pretending to be some saint of poverty. It was the wrong move. Mr. Peterson smiled sadly and pulled out another folder, this one marked with a red seal. Your mother anticipated this too, he said. Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, he addressed my brothers. Are you sure you want to escalate the situation? Your mother left very specific instructions if anyone tried to prevent Chloe from receiving her inheritance. What's that supposed to mean? Jonathan demanded. Mr. Peterson opened the folder, revealing documents that made my brothers step back. Tax records showing discrepancies in their reported income. Evidence of offshore accounts that hadn't been declared. Photos and documentation of Marcus with a woman who wasn't his wife entering a hotel dated and time-stamped. Jonathan's signature on contracts that had been altered after signing a federal crime. Your mother knew everything, Mr. Peterson said quietly. She hoped it would never come to this, but she wanted to protect Chloe. If you pursue any action against her inheritance, legal or otherwise, these documents will be sent to the appropriate authorities. The room went silent. Marcus's phone shook in his hand. Jonathan sank into a chair. Their lawyer whispered urgently about exposure and liability. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. She planned all this. Mom planned all this. I stood up, finding my voice for the first time. She didn't plan for you to fail, Marcus. She just knew who you really were, both of you. Your dad's sons through and through. You got his money, his companies, his legacy. I got Mom's. Seems fair to me. 2 weeks later, the story hit the news. Someone, probably one of their assistants, leaked that the overlooked Sterling daughter had inherited a secret fortune. The headlines were everything Marcus feared, but instead of ruining my reputation, it enhanced it. Suddenly, I wasn't just the social worker daughter. I was the woman who'd chosen service over wealth and been rewarded by a mother who saw her true value. Donations to my shelter doubled. Other nonprofits reached out for partnerships. I was invited to speak at conferences about authentic philanthropy versus performative charity. My brother's companies, meanwhile, faced scrutiny. Journalists started digging into their business practices. The IRS announced an audit. Their carefully constructed world began to crack. 6 months after discovering the letter, I stood in my mother's secret Vermont house for the first time. It was perfect, a Victorian cottage hidden in the woods outside Stowe, with a garden gone wild and rooms full of dust-covered furniture. But it was the basement that took my breath away. She'd built a laboratory, a complete professional-grade chemistry lab with equipment that must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars even in the 90s. There were notebooks everywhere filled with formulas, ideas, innovations she'd never had the chance to develop. On one wall, she'd framed rejection letters from companies that wouldn't hire women, scientists in the 60s, each one annotated with her subsequent achievements that proved them wrong. I found letters too, correspondence with other female scientists she'd secretly funded over the years. Dr. Patricia Williams, who developed a cancer treatment but couldn't get backing because she was Black and female. Mom had sent her $2 million anonymously. Jennifer Chang, whose green energy innovation was being stolen by her male colleagues. Mom had hired lawyers to protect her patents and funded her startup. There were dozens of these stories. Mom had created an entire network of women in STEM supporting them from the shadows, never taking credit, just clearing the path for others to succeed, where she'd been forced to step back. I was reading through one of her notebooks when my phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice sounded different, broken somehow. Chloe, I need to talk to you. Please. I met him at a coffee shop in Burlington Neutral Ground. He looked terrible, thin and hollow-eyed. His wife had left him after the IRS found $12 million in unreported income. The board had voted him out of his CEO position. He was facing criminal charges for tax evasion. I never knew, he said, staring into his coffee. About Mom. about any of it. Dad always said she was just. He trailed off. Just a housewife I supplied. Just a woman who got lucky marrying him. Marcus nodded miserably. He had us believing it. Jonathan and me. We thought the company, the success, it was all him. We wanted to be him. And now you are, I said, not unkindly but honestly. You're facing the consequences of following in his footsteps too closely. He looked up at me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw my brother actually see me. You were always the smart one, weren't you? Not about business, but about life, about what actually matters. I thought about letting him twist in the wind, about all the years of dismissal, the condescension, the casual cruelty of being deemed worthless by association. But then I remembered Mom's words about strength and compassion. I'm starting a foundation, I told him. The Elizabeth Sterling Foundation for Women in STEM. I need someone who understands corporate structure, but is ready to use that knowledge for good instead of greed. The salary is $70,000 a year. No bonuses, no stock options, no company car. Just the chance to help build something that actually matters. Marcus stared at me in shock. You're offering me a job. After everything, I'm offering you a chance to choose a different path, to honor Mom's actual legacy, not the lie Dad sold us. But Marcus, this isn't charity. You work for me, you follow my vision, and you check your ego at the door. Can you handle that? It took him 3 weeks to call me back and accept. Jonathan held out longer, his pride still intact, despite his own federal investigation for securities fraud. But eventually he called too. His wife was pregnant with their third child, and he needed stable income that didn't require looking over his shoulder for FBI agents. I gave them both positions at the foundation, but not executive ones. They started as program coordinators, learning what it meant to work for something beyond profit. Marcus handled corporate partnerships, convincing his former colleagues to fund scholarships. Jonathan managed logistics for our annual science fair for underprivileged girls. They were terrible at first, having to unlearn decades of their father's teachings. But slowly, something changed. Marcus started mentoring young women trying to break into STEM fields, using his business knowledge to help them navigate corporate politics. Jonathan discovered he had a gift for teaching running workshops for kids who'd never imagined they could be scientists. The foundation grew beyond my wildest dreams. We funded 50 scholarships in the first year. Our recipients went on to MIT, Stanford, Caltech. 3 of them have already filed patents. One developed a water purification system that's being deployed in developing countries. Another created a biodegradable plastic alternative that major manufacturers are scrambling to license. I kept finding pieces of Mom everywhere I looked in the Vermont house. Recipe cards with chemical formulas on the back. Photo albums filled with pictures of her at conferences, the only woman in every shot but holding her own. A letter she'd started to her own mother, but never sent, explaining why she'd given up her career for marriage, and immediately regretting it. In her final notebook, dated just a month before she died, I found an entry that made me cry again. Chloe asked me today if I regret my choices. I told her no, because without those choices, I wouldn't have her. But the truth is more complex. I regret not fighting harder. I regret letting Richard's ego matter more than my aspirations. I regret that my sons grew up believing their father's version of success was the only one that mattered. But I don't regret the secret I've kept, the fortune I've built in shadows, the network of women I've helped. Someday when Chloe finds this, she'll understand that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't confrontation, but quiet triumph. Richard will die believing he built an empire. He'll never know. It was built on my foundation, funded by my genius, and ultimately, it will be dismantled by my daughter's truth. The foundation's first annual gala was held on what would have been Mom's 70th birthday. We hosted it in the Sterling Industries building, which I'd purchased when the company went bankrupt following the investigations triggered by my inheritance revelation. Poetic justice, Marcus had called it. And for once, he was right. Dr. Patricia Williams gave the keynote talking about the mysterious benefactor who'd saved her career 20 years ago. Jennifer Chang announced a new scholarship in Mom's name worth $5 million. Dozens of women stood up to share stories of small grants, unexpected support, and anonymous gifts that had changed their trajectories. I stood at the podium where my father had once announced his latest conquest and spoke about my mother, not the missus. Richard Sterling, who'd hosted dinner parties and smiled politely at business functions, but Dr. Elizabeth Watson, the brilliant scientist who'd been erased from her own story. The morning of the first anniversary of finding Mom's letter, I sat in my office at the foundation watching the sunrise through windows that used to frame my father's view of Manhattan. My desk's simple wood, rather than his imposing mahogany, was covered with grant applications from young women around the world. Each one reminded me why Mom had chosen me for this. Marcus knocked and entered with coffee, a ritual we'd developed. He looked healthier now, the constant stress of maintaining Dad's empire replaced with the satisfaction of building something meaningful. His divorce had been finalized, but he seemed at peace with it. His ex-wife had been a mirror of Dad's values. Without the money, she'd shown her true colors and left. Their children visited him every other weekend, and he was teaching them about their grandmother's real legacy. The Times article comes out today, he said, setting down my mug. The one about Mom's patents and how they really built Sterling Industries. I know. I approved the interviews. He sat down across from me, a position he'd once thought beneath him. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Mom had just told the truth from the beginning? I considered it. We'd have grown up differently. You and Jonathan might have respected her work. Dad might have been forced to acknowledge her contributions. But I don't think she could have predicted that her silence would eventually become her loudest statement. Jonathan appeared in the doorway holding his newest baby, a daughter he'd named Elizabeth. He'd brought all three kids to the office, something that would have horrified our father but felt right here. The older two were in the Foundation's Education Center, learning about women scientists throughout history. The investigator called Jonathan said quietly, "They're dropping the securities fraud charges in exchange for my testimony about Dad's practices. Turns out he taught us to crime a little too well." We all shared a rueful laugh. The Sterling Empire had crumbled completely in the past year. Every investigation revealed another corner cut, another regulation skirted, another competitor destroyed, through questionable means. The fortune my brothers had inherited was being eaten away by legal fees and settlements. But they were building something new now. Marcus had started teaching business ethics at community colleges, using his own fall as a cautionary tale. Jonathan was working on a book about toxic masculinity in corporate culture, drawing from our father's playbook as a guide of what not to do. The foundation had grown beyond just STEM. We'd expanded into healthcare education and social services, always with a focus on supporting women whose brilliance had been overlooked or suppressed. We'd helped a nurse in Detroit patent a medical device that reduced post-surgical infections. We'd funded a teacher in rural Alabama whose innovative curriculum had been rejected by her school board. We'd supported a social worker in Seattle who developed a revolutionary approach to addiction treatment. Each success felt like a vindication of Mom's belief that value couldn't be measured in dollars alone. The $42 million she'd left me had already generated hundreds of millions in social value. The women we'd supported had gone on to help thousands more. The ripple effects were incalculable. That afternoon, I visited the cemetery for the first time since we'd buried Dad next to Mom. I'd brought flowers for her grave, lavender and vanilla roses that reminded me of her perfume. Someone had already been there. Fresh flowers sat in the vase and a note was tucked beneath them. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. Your secret gift changed my life. Now your daughter is changing the world just like you always knew she would." Dr. Patricia Williams. I sat on the bench between their graves, my parents lying side by side, but having lived in completely different worlds. Dad's headstone was ostentatious black marble, with gold lettering proclaiming him as founder and CEO of Sterling Industries. Mom's was simple white stone that read, "Elizabeth Watson, Sterling beloved mother, brilliant mind." I'd had it changed to include her maiden name and the truth about her intellect. Dad couldn't object now, and my brothers had agreed it was appropriate. You know, I said out loud, talking to both of them, or neither of them, I spent so long trying to prove I was worthy of being a Sterling. But it turns out the real gift was learning I was worthy of being a Watson. The wind picked up rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like laughter. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to hear. That evening, the foundation hosted a celebration for our scholarship recipients. 50 young women from around the world, each one brilliant, each one facing obstacles that talent alone couldn't overcome. They gathered in the building's top floor conference room, the one where Dad had made his biggest deals, now transformed into a space for collaboration rather than competition. I stood before them, seeing myself at 15, in their eager faces, remembering Mom at 25 in their ambitious eyes. These young women wouldn't have to hide their brilliance or credit it to someone else. They wouldn't have to choose between success and integrity. They could have both because Mom had ensured it. My name is Chloe Sterling. I began, and 19 years ago, my mother wrote me a letter that changed everything. She taught me that being called worthless by someone who doesn't understand worth is actually the highest compliment. She showed me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you distribute. And she proved that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money, but the knowledge that someone truly saw you, valued you, and trusted you with their deepest truth. The young women listened intently, some taking notes, others recording on their phones. They'd share this story with their friends, their families, their future daughters. Mom's legacy would spread far beyond anything Dad had imagined for his empire. As I spoke about the Foundation's mission about supporting brilliance wherever it bloomed, regardless of gender or background, I caught sight of Marcus and Jonathan in the back of the room. They were recording too, not for leverage or manipulation, but to remember, to teach their children a different story than the one we'd grown up believing. The letter that had seemed like a revelation when I'd found it now felt like a responsibility I was honored to carry. Mom hadn't just left me money, she'd left me a mission to ensure that no brilliant woman would have to hide her light under someone else's shadow, to prove that compassion and success weren't mutually exclusive, to show that the real worth of a person couldn't be calculated in dollars, but in the lives they touched. Standing there in the building built on her hidden formula, surrounded by women who would change the world with her hidden fortune, speaking truths that had been hidden for decades, I finally understood what Mom had meant in her last words to me. I did have her strength. Not just emotional strength, but the strength to wait for the right moment. The strength to build in secret when building in public was denied. The strength to plant seeds that would bloom long after the planter was gone. The strength to trust that truth, like water, always finds its way to the surface eventually. The young women applauded as I finished speaking, their enthusiasm genuine and infectious. They didn't see me as the worthless daughter who'd been written out of a will. They saw me as the woman who'd inherited something far more valuable than money, the ability to recognize and nurture brilliance in others, just as my mother had recognized and nurtured it in me. As the evening wound down, and the scholars mingled with mentors and sponsors, I stepped out onto the balcony that had once been my father's smoking retreat. The city sparkled below millions of lights representing millions of dreams. Somewhere out there, a young girl was being told she wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't valuable. But maybe, just maybe, she'd find her way to us. And when she did, we'd show her what my mom had shown me in that letter. That worth isn't determined by those who benefit from keeping you worthless. That inheritance isn't always about money, but about mission. That the greatest revenge against those who dismissed you isn't proving them wrong, but proving yourself right. And that sometimes a 19-year-old letter can change not just everything, but everyone it touches. The foundation now operates in 17 countries. We've funded over 300 women in just 18 months. 3 of our recipients have started companies valued at over $10 million each, and they've all pledged to pay it forward, creating scholarships for the next generation. The ripple effects of Mom's secret fortune have become waves reshaping industries that had been stagnant for decades. Marcus recently called me late one night crying. He'd just spoken to a group of formerly incarcerated women about second chances and rebuilding after failure. One of them had told him that his story gave her hope that people could change, that the past didn't have to define the future. It was the first time he said that he'd felt truly valuable since Dad's empire collapsed. Jonathan published his book last month. It's called The Inheritance Trap: How Toxic Legacy Destroys Families. He dedicated it to Mom and to me, writing that the greatest inheritance he'd received wasn't money, but the chance to become a better man than his father had taught him to be. The book is being used in business schools as a cautionary tale about the cost of success without substance. As I write this sitting in Mom's Vermont laboratory, which is now a research facility for our scholarship recipients, I'm surrounded by her notebooks. Each page represents an idea she couldn't pursue, a dream deferred for the sake of a marriage that never valued her true worth. But those dreams didn't die with her. They were just waiting like that letter for the right time and the right person to bring them to life. The story could end here with triumph over adversity, with the worthless daughter proving her worth with the hidden fortune revealed and put to good use. But that's not really the ending, because every day new letters arrive at the foundation. Not 19th-year-old letters hidden in jewelry boxes, but fresh ones from women who've been told they're not enough, not worthy, not valuable. Each letter is a beginning, not an ending. Each represents a mother, daughter, sister, or friend who needs to know what my mom knew and passed on to me, that worth isn't granted by those in power, but inherent in those who persist. That inheritance isn't just about receiving, but about what you do with what you receive. And that sometimes the most powerful truth is the one that waits patiently for its moment to change everything. So, what do you think about family legacies and hidden truths? Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed how you saw everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about families, secrets, and the unexpected ways we inherit strength from those who came before us. And please share this with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't determined by anyone else's inability to see it. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the greatest inheritance is often the one that can't be measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in the courage to finally tell the truth and the wisdom to know when that truth will do the most good.